Good afternoon, everyone. We're in our Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, June 19th. Halton's Fall and Peace Gospel Homish, Oelmel. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda from the committee. I'm looking for a motion to adopt, moved by Councillor Kent, second by Councillor Reyes. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. First up, we have business item 3.1, designated off-leash areas. Natasha, are you going to kick this off?
Yeah, Rick is. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Natasha Kolbeck. I'm the Senior Director of Community Services, responsible for bylaw, among other things.
My name is Rick Breen. I'm the Manager of Bylaw Enforcement and Animal Control. Today with us is Nav Gill. She's the Real Estate Coordinator for the district. And to my far right is Kent Popjes. He's an officer with the Conservation Officer Service of British Columbia. And we may need to ask him to weigh in at some point.
Yeah. And just a reminder, this is a committee meeting, so very inclusive. If anyone wants to speak or comment or ask a question, just put your hand up and you'll be put into the speakers list, and please join us at the table.
So Council, before you is a report to Council on designated off-leash areas, and I'd just like to take this time to walk you through just a small slideshow and talk about where we are today. So a little bit of background. In October 2016, Council, there was a motion that the District of Squamish approved, in principle, the following 6 off-leash locations within the District of Squamish. 1, Dyke area behind the dog pound. 2, Valley Cliff, Dyke, Magnolia, Hemlock. BC Hydro right-of-way, Ray Peters Trail. Judson Dyke, Eagleman Park, and 7th Avenue. And that Council directs staff to conduct a public information session to determine the level of interest for locations 1, 2, and 3, and report back to Council with the results. Since then, staff have mapped out some logistical assessments. We've consulted with key stakeholders, Squamish Nation, BC Hydro, Crown Lands, our dogs, and other partner agencies such as Conservation Officer Service and WildSafe BC. BC Hydro right-of-way, Ray Peters Trail, was determined to be the leading candidate. As we move forward in the process and obtain the permission and licensing with BC Hydro, we learned through WildSafe BC and the Conservation Officer Service that this area, at one time, there's always considered a conflict area for wildlife and off-leash dogs, but because we target hardened the landfill with electrified fencing, then we were afraid that we're going to push the natural habitat, the bears, the wolves, the coyotes, into the hydro right-of-way. And we thought that we might need to look at fencing to help mitigate the conflict in that area, and that we needed an increase from the 17.5 that was provided. So we looked at some other sites, and some of them have come before you before, and upon reevaluating what's available to us, we thought that we would reintroduce some of them. So the first one would be Eagleman Park downtown, John Hunter Park at Valley Cliff, Brennan Park East, Raven Drive. There's a hydro right-of-way there. We hadn't introduced that previously. And of course, hydro right-of-way, Ray Peters Trail in Brackendale. And what that would look like, Eagleman Park, I'm not sure if you can see on the overhead, but there's, oh, perfect. There's a red line around the section. Near there is a open grassed area. It would also include some bush area that's currently unmanaged. Total acreage of about 2.7. There's a small children's play area that would be that's currently there, that would be separate from the off-leash area. We brought back John Hunter Park because we thought it was a a nice size, 2.5 acres. There are some homes bordering it, borders the dike, the Squamish River dike. Is basically, it's a large grass field. There's really no amenities there. Brennan Park East, this was identified by our real estate division, and it's a hydro right-of-way, and it's 2.5 acres, or pardon me, 2 acres. It's currently just a flat field. The area to the north, we marked out of bounds because it is a riparian area, environmentally sensitive. But this particular area is already being used by local residents. And of course, the hydro right-of-way Ray Peters Trail. The reason why it says 5 to 20 acres is because we looked at it in 2 pieces. If we created something smaller, not as long, we could see an area of perhaps 5 acres. And if we included the entire hydro right-of-way between Depot Road and Squamish Valley Road, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 acres. So a nice long stretch. I mentioned that some of the ways that we could mitigate wildlife conflict would be through traditional fencing, and basically there's 2 options for us. Traditional chain link fencing, probably a 30+ year lifespan. Wildlife fencing, which is typical of what you see on the Coquihalla Highway to keep the wildlife back. Wood posts, pressure treated, probably has about a 20-year life cycle. Took the opportunity to look at costs, upfront costs, and annual maintenance, and wildlife ratings, and the neighbors that might be affected, and the usage and available parking in the area. So just really quickly going through the high right-of-way Ray Peters Trail, 5 acres, $126,664 for the chain link, wildlife $81,000 and change, maintenance cost around $21,000. Wildlife rating is high for the reasons that I mentioned before. A lot of activity in that area. We're pushing the wildlife away from the landfill. So the potential is obviously a lot higher there. Neighbors affected, one directly and others perhaps indirectly. Currently it's an off-leash area. It's been utilized for decades. Parking is available. And then the 20-acre site, you can go through the numbers, significantly higher cost. Everything else remains the same in terms of ratings and neighbors and usage of parking. Eagle Wind, $166,100 for the chain link and $140,000 and change for the wildlife. Maintenance costs are around $9,900 a year. Moderate. Right now, there's a sow and 2 cubs living in that area, but we're not aware of anything greater than that in terms of wildlife. 41 neighbors because there's a large concentration of homes in that area. Currently has off-leash usage. Parking is available. John Hunter Park up in Valley Cliff, 2.5 acres, $53,900 is the chain link cost and $33,400 is the wildlife fencing cost. $6,600, so it's fairly low maintenance, annual maintenance cost. It's got a wildlife rating of low. 12 neighbors border that property, and there's currently fencing on the neighbor side, so we would probably be looking at 50% fencing for that location. We wouldn't have to do the whole thing. Current off-leash usage, and there is quite a bit of parking available. And finally, Raven Drive, 2 acres, $125,000 for the chain link, $95,000 for wildlife, $12,800 for maintenance costs. And the wildlife rating, we're unsure. But in my conversation with Sergeant Simone from the Conservation Officer Service, he believed that that was the lowest conflict area available in the district. And we need to recognize that there is going to be some sort of wildlife conflict. Because we live in a wildlife corridor, there will be some conflict somewhere in the district. But we're looking at the low, medium, and high ranges. So that, again, is the probably one of the lowest. 3 neighbors affected. Current usage is no, and parking would be on street. There's nothing available. So the recommendation is that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that the District of Squamish pursue public engagement for the following off-leash dog locations within the District of Squamish: Eagle Inn Park, downtown; John Hunter Park, Valleycliff; Raven Drive, BC Hydro right-of-way, Brennan Park East, and Hydro right-of-way, Ray Peters Trail. And that staff bring forward the results of the public engagement and a budget estimate for consideration in the 2019-2023 5-year financial plan. And we are open to questions.
So at this point, let's just get questions for clarification purposes. Councillor Pryor and Councillor Clinton.
So the hydro right-of-way, 6 to 20 acres, is that, I mean, you're planning to fence both sides of that? What about wildlife?
I'm not sure what
Well, you put a fence all the way through that right-of-way, and you're going to keep the bear on one side and the cub on the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to have gates, and it's more about keeping the dogs in than the wildlife out. And a motivated animal is going to be able to get over and through and around it. It won't. So that's what we're considering.
And that's why they're considering a smaller portion versus the whole 28 acre.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a 5-acre parcel or a 20-acre parcel. We just want to give council some options.
And so, no matter what area we're looking at, we're fencing.
Correct.
Is there any areas where we might put future dog park and people can take their dogs there?
We haven't identified any yet.
Just looking at your the pricing that you put down for chain link versus wildlife fencing, is that inclusive of signage and waste bins, etc., or is that just fencing alone?
That's just.
That includes all the park.
I'm going to defer to Nab. She put the numbers together for us.
Yes, hi. So yeah, that includes kiosks for signage and garbage cans and benches in some situations, and so that's all included.
That's all in?
Yeah.
It does not include water access
Yes.
though. And so as we go forward with public consultation, if that's what you choose to do, then we will have to price that out separately, and that will probably be a relatively significant cost.
Maybe if you could go back to where we have the cost laid out, Rick, and
Sure.
now you break those out because some of it seems exponential if you're just looking at fencing.
Yes.
So what's included in the price?
Sorry. So the chain link is $35 a meter. The rough cost for the whole perimeter, and then wildlife fencing is $20 per meter. And then if you want other cost breakdowns, I can provide those as well.
So maybe just giving it some example, the John Hunter Park, you would have, what, about 200 meters of fence or 600 feet of fence?
Got it somewhere here, sorry. So for example, Eagle Wind is 550 meters of fence.
And so the other costs, because the other costs would be included in this price?
Yeah, so 3 garbage cans, doggy bag dispensers, kiosks, benches, and then the fencing gates and the actual fence.
And at this point, it doesn't include water?
No water.
Thanks. And my other question was, and possibly to our conservation officer who I see sitting here, talking about the hydro right-of-way at Ray Peters Trail, which is currently in use anyway, and has been for quite a while. It says it's a high rating for wildlife. Are we seeing fairly regular conflict in there?
Ken,
Yeah,
do you want to comment on
Come join
that?
us at the table.
We're going all this way, so you should know that.
Again,
Thank you.
Council, this is Kent Popchis from Conservation Officer Service.
Hello everybody, thanks for the invite. Yeah, Ray Peters is, I would say, I don't have the stats like broken down to produce, but I can say just from all the emails we get that it would be our highest conflict in the district for dogs encountering wildlife and calling us with their concerns. Everything from, there's just everything is in that big chunk of bush there. There's coyotes, wolves, we have bobcats everywhere, cougars, there's elk in there, deer, bear. The biggest conflicts seem to be with wolf and bear. So typically the dogs are off leash, and often the bear calls, you know, it's pretty it's instinct, right? They chase a bear, the bear runs and then it says, I've had enough of this, turns and chases the dog back to the owner, and they come really close. And we often, in the province, we have numerous conflicts like this every year where the bear actually makes contact with the person. The person's trying to grab their dog, get it back on leash, and the bear takes a swipe. They're typically not major injuries, but we get lots of people getting one swat type of thing or a bite in that situation. So I think that's why Simone mentioned that's probably not, for us, would be a no-go spot, or we certainly would recommend against that based on the conflicts.
Yeah,
And I think one thing to consider on this, and it's just sort of a speaking aloud thought, is we're looking at potentially developing the Chikai fan in there too, which runs very long. I know that it's not going to intrude into the hydro right away. Yeah, I know I'm veering off topic, but it's just something for consideration.
Councillor Schmull, that was your question, do you have
That
that?
I was wondering about the amount of, in our district, conflicts that were reported and actually recorded in various areas.
Yeah, we'd have to get our admin staff to kind of break it all down for us if we want to have that.
Okay, just sit a little closer to the table so the microphone can pick up.
Yeah, for sure. If that's something you guys would like, then you know, I can go and get that information. It'll take some time to.
Yeah, I think at this
to
point,
pull it out,
understanding that it's high
Yeah.
is the important piece. It'd be good to understand the amplitude at some point, but
Yeah.
High for one person might not be high for another person. I just think that.
this is.
It also gets a lot
important
of-
to the conservation.
Yeah,
office.
I mean, that area gets an awful lot of people walking dogs. It's just a great spot as far as that goes, right? The people that keep their dogs on leash are more successful with the encounters than those that have their dog running amok and bringing wildlife back to the owner. Yeah.
When we talk about taking this out for engagement, what is the level of engagement you're contemplating?
Well, I think we want to engage on all sites that council wants to consider and talk about that impact to the neighbors, talk about what level of utilization that we'd be looking at, whether or not people would travel from, 5 minutes away, 20 minutes away to come to this dog park. I think utilization, risks of having tolerance for proximity to schools, things like that, unforeseen barriers.
Are we surveying or knocking on doors or hosting? Like, how are we going to reach the people directly impacted? I'm just trying to get a sense because part of me doesn't want to do a lot. Part of me would like to just have off-leash dog parks.
Yeah.
And part of me understands that there's an impact to the neighbors right nearby. So I'm just trying to gauge where we're going to find that balance.
Councillor Elliott, I'd be prepared to speak to that, if that's okay, Tasha. So for those that are within close proximity of these sites, we would do a mailer, a door-to-door mailer, hand deliver them, give them an opportunity to understand what's going on and get some feedback. We also would like to do a survey through the district, and Nav and I were contemplating having an open house here at City Hall, perhaps on Council Night or something like that, have some displays. So those are the three areas that we're thinking that we would engage the public.
And I know at some point we had talked about trying to find one of these in each neighborhood.
Yes.
So I'd like you to speak to that, because I do think that there's a sort of a threshold with how far people will drive to go and use this type of thing. But secondly, we talk about 2 acres being small.
Yes.
I think you certainly want them big enough, but it could be, for example, in the John Hunter Park area, the neighbors are really concerned about having dogs, having the district basically use their fences. And that we may want to just have the dog park on a portion of it that isn't up against, I'm hypothesizing at this point. But was there, through your investigation, was there sort of an optimal size for a dog park? 2 acres is actually a big chunk of land for a dog park. And obviously that dramatically impacts the cost of these things as well.
So the feedback that we received early in the process was that 5 acres was the optimal size for any off-leash area. The challenge is finding a 5-acre parcel that we can use that's available. That's been a real challenge for us in any of the communities within Squamish.
Where was this in? Where did we find out that 5 acres was optimal? Just in asking other communities?
Earlier in the process, when our dogs came and partnered with us, they did quite a bit of research, and from that research, and a lot of it was based on what other cities and districts were doing. They came to us with that number and said that that's what the optimal size would be.
Now, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add that there is some existing smaller dog parks and they're not very well used because they are deemed to be too small.
But they're like the size of this room, I think.
Keep throwing
They're
balls
not
on
even
the
an acre.
fence.
I just know my property's an acre and it would make a pretty big dog park for 1 acre.
Thanks. Where does this fit into? This is a lot of work and budget money, and I'm just wondering where it fits into our priorities. Because staff time spent on this and going forward. And as well, fencing in areas that are not fenced in, that are enjoyable public spaces, and any of these areas.
We're going to get to the debate part, so the question is, how does this fit into our priorities?
This is one of the items in Council's strategic plan, and it's been contemplated in the budget ongoing, albeit at a minimal level. It's been $17,500, which has been carried forward to do consultations, stakeholder information sessions, and whatnot. But it is included in the Healthy Communities area strategic. And it is additionally, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's also in Parks and Rec Master Plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Jason?
I think I would like to see, just as far as what I see is missing as far as the options and going to consultation, because I think it's really important that we lay out all of the options, and sometimes we always forget the obvious option, which is sort of status quo, or maybe more of an emphasis on individual responsibility, those kinds of things. So I'd be really interested throughout the consultation phase to know what people's views are on that, because I suspect that we may not be as analogous as a more urban setting, where space is at a premium and there's a lot more competition for space. So I think it's really, really important that we have that when we do the consultation and talk more later.
Yeah, we've noted it.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
if I might, through the chair, what Councillor Blackman-Wolf says is actually super pertinent, because off-leash dogs and conflicts with dogs on the trails, whether it's runners or people on bikes, is one of our highest complaints. So the very first thing you'll remember that we looked at back in 2014 was off-leash areas versus off-leash park, something that would be low maintenance required, no fencing, and the feedback was actually almost the opposite. So for example, the area by the golf course, we thought, hey, people are already there. Absolutely not. Immediately what was happening was off-leash dogs were going after runners. We started getting high numbers of complaints, and in fact, we put up a sign saying, this is absolutely adamantly an on-leash area, because there was dogs going everywhere. And so it soon came that, except for where there's some unofficial spots right now that we don't enforce, we moved to a different philosophy, because we started getting a lot of feedback from people who are afraid of dogs, who don't want dog encounters on the trails or the deck tops. So we had to sort of switch gears, which is what was presented in 2016.
So yeah, and so I think the challenge is, and what I'd like to hear, because obviously we as a municipality, we don't hear from the people who love the status quo, right? You hear from the people who it affects, and I'm not saying that that's the entire solution, but when I had my head around what we would be sort of going for was, some particular areas where there was just a warning sign, like, hey, this is kind of an off-leash area, and then also have poop bags for the dogs and that kind of stuff, and sort of just in certain areas, so that, if you were not really a dog person, you might not spend as much time there, and you more gravitate towards other trails. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I'll move name.
I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Maybe just introduce yourself.
I'm Meg Fellows. I'm not representing anybody, but I've been involved in the establishment of the wildlife management area, and I've been involved with council in the 90s as well. And I've been following this issue and have been curious about how we're dealing with this, because this is, as people know, a long-standing issue. I'm just wondering, we've got a wildlife interface map that was part of the report, which I think is excellent, by the way. I'm just wondering if we have an encounter dog people problem areas. Do we have information about where those major problem areas are, so we get a sense of perhaps priorities if council can't do it all at once?
Yeah, we have the high conflict areas with dog and people. I think we've got the wildlife piece, but with dog.
Yeah, and I reached out to the Ministry of Environment Conservation Service to see if they could bring some stats back, as well as WildSafe BC, and we didn't have that. And what I can say,
I'm not talking about wildlife, human and dog.
And then what I can say within the district, really, I think what Robin said is we find to be true. A lot of the dog on people conflicts seem to happen along the trails. They do happen just kind of like everywhere. We can't target one area and say they're happening here or they're happening there.
We haven't mapped the conflicts.
And we haven't noticed a trend either.
Previously, the oceanfront lands was the worst.
Previously,
but which is no longer the case. So the people who were going down to the oceanfront frequently have dispersed throughout the community now, and they're in other areas. So
the people with dogs, off-leash dogs, you're saying?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Did you want to add to that? Or? No.
Myself?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of our lower wildlife conflict areas. We do have the odd bear that rolls through there, but we've had very few complaints, from my recollection. I've been here 8 years, on significant conflicts with wildlife down there.
The second question I have is the wildlife conflict, that's wildlife people. I'm just wondering how that relates to species at risk, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking particularly, my concern is the estuary. That's not labeled, I understand why, on the map. But it's a huge issue and a huge concern for some of us in terms of trying to get a handle of the dog conflicts, because it's a problem down there, just anecdotally, and you probably get a bazillion calls about that as well, because the birds and that kind of stuff, and it is part of the flyway, that's why it was created. So how does that impact with this discussion about cars?
When you say waterfront, you're referring to the Nexon Beach primarily, or not?
Wildlife management area.
Yeah, well, obviously that's not doesn't work, right? Dogs down there, we get regular complaints about chasing geese, other shorebirds, all kinds of stuff, right?
Because I'm just concerned that the council understand that for the downtown area and prioritizing things, it's not simply a question of people and dogs. It's actually the wildlife as well, and not necessarily the charismatic megafauna. It's the little stuff too that doesn't make it in the reports, as far as I know. Am I fair enough?
I want to just build on your comment too, because our dogs recommended to us that the downtown Eco-Link location was really optimal because it would, though it does have a sort of moderate conflict potential with smaller species as well, the larger ones, that they could, you could divert the off-leash dog use into that area. So that has been supported.
So this is either yay or nay for off-leash. Have we thought about splitting times, like saying from 9 till 3, your dogs are allowed off-leash, or morning walk, you know, like 7 till 9 a.m.? Just setting out times when dogs can be off-leash as opposed to an all-out, your dogs are free-for-all all the time in this area?
You mean,
so that you can, yeah, so that there's times where if people don't like dogs, they know that between this time and this time, instead of, you know, making it all for the sort of people that love dogs and all for the sort of people that don't love dogs, saying, you know, maybe morning times is an off-leash time, and then people know that if they're afraid of off-leash dogs, and then the rest of the time they, you know, like 7 till 9 in the morning before work, and then the rest of the time is regular regulations.
So part of what this report is it's about also wildlife dog has been escalating, and to try to manage that. So if we do identify an off-leash area that's not fenced or is in the trail, we still have the wildlife issue with the dogs. And, you know, we've had 2 dogs killed this year in the riparian area by coyotes.
The last couple of years, it's been pretty
So,
steady.
you know, like it's becoming higher. And that's what we're trying to prevent, and to keep the animals, dogs safe, the wildlife safe, and the people safe. So it's
I'm talking about the Eagle Wind Park in
Eagle Wind
particular.
Park, okay.
So if we're picking Eagle Wind Park, and instead of restricting it only to, like saying that Eagle Wind Park is only for off-leash dogs, or that this area is an off-leash dog area, reducing the conflict even more by saying that between these hours, it's an off-leash dog area, so that your dog gets exercise, but the park's not completely restricted to people that have fear, or instead of just saying.
It would be constructed as an off-leash park. It would be designated.
With fencing.
100%. With fencing.
Which restricts use for other people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because there's other parks downtown and trails and estuary where people can go to recreate without their dogs, you know, or with their dogs on leash. So.
If it's a question.
No, I'll wait for it.
Thanks. Ken is delegation today, so maybe I'll just ask the floor.
Yes, I'm Ken McKenzie, and my chief concern is the conflict between dogs and humans. And I've been attacked by a dog on one of our trails. I've often been threatened by packs of dogs who are out there with dog walkers. And we also have Joanna Schwartz here, who was viciously attacked by a dog and very badly injured. So my concern is that the dog that attacked me was the so-called rescue dog, and the dog that attacked Joanna was a rescue dog. And I have written something to the council on the fact that these dogs are particularly dangerous because they're unpredictable. And when they do attack, they're very fast and they're very vicious. So the dog that attacked me, we had met. I met with the owner. The dog was off leash on a trail. And by the way, just so you know, Reiner and I spend a lot of time on the trails around here. I very seldom see a dog on leash. Mostly, as soon as people leave the settled areas of Squamish, the dogs come off leash and they stay that way. So this person came down with his off-leash dog. I talked to both the person and the dog. The dog came to me. I petted the dog on the side. He went back to his owner, was given good positive feedback, and I said, thank you, goodbye, I'm on my way. As soon as I turned my back, the dog came up and grabbed my wrist. I shook him off. He ran around and he grabbed my other wrist. So I have no idea what the dog was thinking. I'd already thought I had made friends with it, but clearly that wasn't the case. I think that because of these particular dogs, that is, they're rescue dogs, I think it's a good idea to have off-leash areas. That's great. But should you have a rescue dog in an off-leash area where it can attack other dogs or other people in the same way? And I think the rescue dogs should be treated as a separate category. And my extreme approach to this is to ban them entirely. I don't think we should have them in this community. If we do, if we agree to bring them in, we should have special licensing for them. And maybe even put a yellow tag in their area, just like the conservation people do to the problem bears, so that you can see from far away that this is a dangerous animal.
I have 3 rescue dogs, so obviously this is a...
Sure, it's sensitive.
Yeah, and they're all very benign. So I understand there's bad dogs out there.
Yeah.
And there's often bad owners out there.
Yes.
So just a question to you, Ken, how would you define rescue dog? Because there's dogs that have been part of a family and everyone thinks they have a rescue dog, even if they're from Mexico or if they're from a breeder in Langley that the first home didn't. I just don't know how you would define it. And first of all,
sure.
I'd rather just, if you have a problem dog, not discriminate against them from the beginning, but if there's a problem dog, designate them as a problem dog. And we have those policies already.
Well, we do that. And we did it, but it didn't protect Joanna. And it didn't protect me. I think if a dog has not got basically a solid home, solid training, and comes from somewhere else like Mexico, the chances are they've been abused. And as a result are very vicious. I think if somebody's bringing a dog like that into our community, we should have a special licensing procedure. That is, both the dog and the human need to be trained until we're fairly sure this is a safe dog. But it should always be on leash. And in Europe, in some places, they need to be on leash and muzzled.
Certainly all the dogs, we currently have on-leash policies.
Yeah,
we do.
I know that. But most people who walk the trails don't have their dogs on leashes.
So acknowledging the fact that most people don't obey our bylaws and almost impossible to police, we do rely on people to obey the law. We don't have enough people, police on the highway to hit every speeder. We rely on people to go the speed limit. We rely on people generally to adhere to bylaws and laws. That's the way society's founded.
Yep.
So, and we've had this conversation before about can we just enforce our way out of this challenge? And I look at the enforcement guys and it's almost impossible. We could hire 100 bylaw officers and never be able to enforce this issue. So that's the challenge. So I think we're trying to come up with, and totally open the discussion about different licensing for different dogs. And that's part of the conversation. Can I maybe just have you quickly comment on the proposal of the certain fenced-in dog areas?
Yes, I think it's a good idea and I support it.
And in anyone in particular, or just having a number of them in various neighborhoods?
I think a number of them would be appropriate, because if you have it too far away, as you said, that people aren't going to want to drive long distances to get to it. And then their dogs will be running free elsewhere.
Councillor Schwab.
I just generally think that it's really difficult to enforce. I'm not at all in favor of fencing in general. And setting aside dog parks and keeping our bylaws exactly the same, and designating possibly times or areas where dogs can be off leash, where people can avoid if they're fearful. But I generally think our bylaws cover being on leash in our entire district, and as you say, the enforcement is difficult.
Any questions, clarification?
No, I was gonna ask about the number of dog licenses we have right now. How many people are generally licensing their dogs right now? Do we know that number, Doug?
Generally, we're around the 2,200 mark. Last year, we increased it slightly to about 2,300.
Thank you.
Councillor Craig.
Yeah, I think it's great. I like the location of all these parks, and you know, I heard 2014, that's when we started talking about this, and so it's about time. And I wish it would have come sooner. I think in order to change people, you have to give them the option. So we don't have any off-leash parks, or a couple little ones. So people take their dogs for a walk, they don't have an option. But all these ones are in fairly high, residential houses. So they're handy to everybody. They should be fenced. And the only one that I have a little bit of exception with is the hydro right-of-way. But like you say, if you did 5 acres or 3 acres or something up there, people traveling the highways, they've got their dog, the time will come where they go, well, we gotta take the dog for a walk. Where's the closest dog park? And they'll just type it in and they'll drive down there and take their dog for a little walk, and then on they'll go. But, so I think this is a great step forward, and I hope they get fenced in pretty quick. I like all of them. How about that?
Councillor Kent.
Just a question, and I know it exists sort of on the periphery of the conversation, but I saw your note here about discussions with Newport Beach to see if it can be incorporated into the oceanfront park design. I wondered if you heard anything back on that, any feedback.
I'm gonna let Nav speak to that because she has the latest.
Through the chair. We had discussions last summer with the Oceanfront Development Company and told them about this idea that we wanted to incorporate some sort of off-leash area, and then we didn't hear back, and then now planning has been involved, and they've also provided them with the feedback that an off-leash area is important, and they heard that a lot in their surveys that they conducted as well. And so we don't have any updates on where that is, but they're still planning the park, and that has been included in the feedback.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Dave Merrill, Director of Major Projects. I just thought I could chime in here through the chair. The park design process is ongoing. We have recently seen sort of an updated concept of the park layout. The goal all along has been to see if we have space down there or an appropriate location for a dog park. It's proving challenging just due to all the different activities we're trying to accommodate. The latest design didn't specifically have an area for a dog park, but providing some initial feedback, they're looking at some potential relatively small areas. We're not talking about expansive areas, but small areas that the dogs could access the water and would be sort of segregated somewhat from the rest of the activities in the beach. So it's an ongoing process. I can't say for certainty that there will be something down there, but we're looking at options.
Now, can you just help me get some context? There's a small off-leash dog park in Eagle Wing Park. It's got like 4-foot high fences that my previous dog just sailed over in a second. But how big is that?
Maybe is it less than half an acre, maybe?
Oh,
yeah.
I think it's like a tenth of an acre.
Yeah, if
Like
that.
2 tennis courts.
Yeah.
No, it's not smaller than the tennis courts. It's like 1 tennis court, just the court.
Chihuahua Park.
It's a Chihuahua. And I guess I'm asking the question to lead to another question is, and I don't know if Joanna or anyone else did the research about the optimal size park, but maybe an approach we take is, because I do think it's good to have fenced-in off-leash areas. I've been to many communities where they work really well. They reduce conflict. They give owners an opportunity to socialize their dogs and socialize with other dog owners. That we don't like dogs. But maybe we take a small, come on up, Joanna. Maybe we take an incremental approach and say, okay, well, let's put an acre in here and an acre in here. and an acre here. Because fencing is very big cost. And in the future, maybe we grow it to, because an acre is a big area for a dog park. It's not a small area for a dog park. And I don't know if they evaluate it on dogs per acre, you know, and if you get too many dogs per acre, then maybe that's an approach we take, so we're not biting off a big financial. I guess that's a question to staff and council. Joanne, maybe you want to add a little bit?
I was co-founder of Our Dogs, and I'm no longer involved in organizing, but at the time, one of our vets, Dr. Armstrong, made a wonderful research paper on the optimal size, and some of the things that are good for dogs, you know, not that they see each other, right, as they come in, those special entry gates you talked about, and she'd be a really good resource for you, an optimal size and an optimal park from other communities.
But yeah, so maybe we can ask for research, but you know, maybe we start off with an acre at John Hundred Park and an acre at Eagle Wind. It would be about a quarter of the prices that are up there, and that's a start. And then if we need to extend it, we've designed it such that we just take the one and blow it out bigger in the future, depending on budgets. But maybe that's a way to make this incremental, because I think in an ideal world you wouldn't need these, but people always aren't as responsible as they should, and dogs are unpredictable. People are unpredictable.
I was on a trail recently in Fort Langley, the Langley area, and the sign came at a certain point and said, "This is an off-leash area." So I actually decided I don't think I want to go there. But that was helpful. Just a little sign that said, "This is more for dogs running free." I had a choice.
And I think council's open to some of those, although finding exactly where they don't impact wildlife and that they don't minimize your freedom to, or someone's freedom to walk somewhere is, maybe it's timing. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. And to Meg's point about the wildlife management area, I mean, that is a huge problem out here in the estuary with the dogs. We definitely need signage there, whether that comes under this. And and you know, the size of the park, 1 acre, if I stood in the middle of a 1 acre and threw the dog the ball, I'd be throwing the dog over the fence. I'd be throwing the ball over the fence.
You've got a good arm.
No, well, I mean, an acre is basically 250 by 250. I mean, it's not that big of an area. So I mean, I think the sizes on here, I mean, we've got this group in front of us here. I mean, cut back that 20-acre piece to the 3-acre piece or something, and why build it too small? Oh, gee, we put an acre in there and it's not working out. The dogs are fighting and there's no room for anybody to throw the ball.
So we make it bigger.
Well, let's make it bigger, yeah. So we make it bigger. Why go through that for what? We're saving a little bit of fencing. We've done all the homework on it. Anyway.
I think that if I just may respond to that quickly, the difference is that if we did all three of them at 2.5 or 2.7 acres, it's a $500,000 ticket. It's a lot of money. So this is just an incremental way of saying, okay, let's do smaller parks with the eye that they are expandable by just taking one fence out and adding another fence.
We started the conversation in 2014. So over 4 years, that's 100,000, 120,000 a year for 4 years.
But we haven't been putting in a
I know,
reserve to do
I
that.
know, well, just might go by the wayside.
I'll go to Jason and Susan.
I'm not in favor of any fencing. I don't think this is the best way to go. I do understand the potential for conflict, and those things do happen. But I don't think that this, fencing a couple of parks is going to change that. If I thought it would, I'd totally be in favor of it, but it won't change that, and I think it can actually make things worse. I think the focus should really be on responsible dog ownership and training, and so that it is just expected that you should be able to control your dog off leash, and if you can't, then your dog should be on leash, and that is just a societal expectation. And also with regards to wildlife conflicts, I'm also not in favor of fencing, but again, if there is, and we know that on social media and stuff, alerts do come out about the trails, because, you know, I'll fess up, I'm one of the dog people up on the Ray Peters Trail all of the time. But the thing that I like about that trail, particularly the Hydro right-of-way, is it's got really good visibility and vistas when you're on the trail under the Hydro right-of-way. So it's actually, if you choose the right time of year, the right time of day, and you have your dogs, you know, close to you, you can minimize risk. There's always risk in life, and, you know, some people will take that on, right? And so I think that we just need to have a little bit better signage and also better facilities for the existing sort of areas. And I just wanted to ask one thing. When you were referring to the golf course area, the trial area, you're not talking about the area behind the SPCA, are you? Like on the dike there?
No, but the Mancomb River, adjacent to Squamish Valley Golf. So there's a trail in there, and there's the dike top.
Okay. And so did we not explore, because the area by the sewage treatment plant there, what's the issue with there?
Unofficial off-leash
Okay.
area.
Yeah. Because like even if we put up a sign there, because that one is also very low impact, because there's only municipal facilities bordering it. And again, I just think of, you know, if you're a neighbor of like the only dog park in Squamish, it's going to probably change the experience of your property. Whereas right now it's more dispersed, and the risk is dispersed, and I don't know. I mean, my experience, both personal and anecdotal, suggests that there's better ways, and in fact, like, you know, my dogs can't deal with a penned-in kind of area. It's actually worse. There's more conflict with dogs, so, you know, I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't want to leave your dog on the trail.
My dogs have never jumped on anybody, I can tell you that. And they are actually rescue dogs as well, but we got them in there 6 months. So.
Thanks. I agree with Councillor Blackman Wolf. I think spending money on chain link fencing wrecks the experience for users of the parks, and that we shouldn't be setting parks aside for just dogs. That it should be that our parks are there for walkable green space, and it should be an enjoyable experience for everybody. And I agree with setting parks and having them spread out throughout town, like having Eagle Wind and the Hydro right-of-ways, and these areas that aren't, you know, one park in downtown, one park in the Highlands, where they're walkable and usable for dog owners with signage and education, not chain link fencing. I believe in wildlife corridor traveling. Animals that are used to crossing the paths of green space, eating the blackberries in the area, are going to be impacted by putting chain link fence. And I look at the maintenance cost. I'd rather put that into developing public parks and spaces. I don't want to be spending money on chain link fencing on green space. And you know, I think that the wildlife management area that Meg brings up, you know, that area, I will also fess up, you know, most people have their dogs off leash in that area now. Since that trail went in and it became accessible, and it's right next to downtown, and the borders are very defined, dogs tend to stay on the trail, and it is an area where people in downtown go to. And I agree that there's conflict. We should actually manage the estuary where the tidal areas go out. Dogs need to be on leash in there, but there are other areas further away along the railway tracks that could be off leash. And then as you enter the conflict areas where it's estuary and bird conflict area. But when you have a growing population that is growing rapidly, and you're putting high density right next to trail networks, you can't expect people need to be able to get out. And one of the pleasures of living in Squamish is being able to walk on the trails with your dog. And as you can see, with 2,300 dogs, that our community is very dog oriented. And I know as a dog owner that we actually, you know, when our dogs meet and are on leash, the conflict is more impactful than our dogs being off leash. Wildlife is a great concern, and managing that conflict as well. But you're right next to an industrial railway track with trains going down to the port. There's a lot of conflicts that we all have to manage, and a lot of risks that we have to manage. And when you have density next to areas, you're going to have to provide rules and regulations that people have to be cognizant of. But I think that, restricting areas with chain link fencing really provides the wrong message as far as green space and public parks. It's not the experience that I want when I go to a park, is to have chain link fencing and dogs just in one impactful area. It's dispersed, it's respectful. There's definitely going to be conflict, like any area, like there's going to be wildlife people conflicts on the trails regardless of dogs.
We've moved into opinion, obviously, but if someone does have a clarification question, I'll let you jump the queue, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks. Well, to the conservation folks here, I mean, your area is, I know you've got a huge area. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, are municipalities moving to these dog parks because of wildlife conflict and people conflict? Is that in your experience that they're doing that, or?
Actually can't comment on that. I don't know. We cover Vancouver to Darcy, so we've got a big area.
Well,
and I'm not that intimate with the ongoings of each community with respect to their dog on leash, off leash.
Okay, now I've got more comments, but I'll wait.
Thank you. So I think there's a hybrid solution here. Like, I think that the dog park near Eagle Wind is important because I think that people should have a chance to off-leash their dog and throw the ball and then put them on a leash, and if they want to continue to walk through the estuary, they have that option. But I think we kind of have to drop the hammer in that area a little bit more because it's outrageous what's happening in the estuary. So I think in urban environments like downtown, it is useful to have fenced areas because urban dwellers do want to run their dog, and so I think in certain respects there's a place for fenced-in dog parks. I was asking earlier about the engagement piece because I think there's owners, like my fellow councillor, who won't use the dog parks. And I think that we need to actually engage on the trail. So not survey online, but actually meet people on the trail with their dogs off leash. And not in bylaw officer uniform, but like just people saying, we're thinking of setting up dog parks. Would you use a dog park? When would you not? Because I'm not sure that we're going to capture the people that we want to capture. And we could spend a whole bunch of money here and not really solve the problem with the conflicts that we're having. I've been molested by so many friendly dogs, it drives me crazy. Oh, don't worry, she's friendly. And then I've got 2 muddy paw prints on me, or my kids have been pushed over. And my kids are afraid of dogs because of friendly dogs, not because any dogs ever attack them, but because they are constantly molested by friendly dogs off leash. It's super annoying. And so, but like, until we get the message across that people need to earn the right to walk their dog off leash in our community in certain areas, I think we need to find a hybrid solution. So I would really encourage staff to think about how we reach the people who are already walking their dog off leash in some of those high conflict areas, and really trying to understand what would motivate them to put their dog on a leash if they understood why it was important in that particular area. So if we were down in the estuary, that's one thing. If we're out at the golf course, what would it take for them to train their dog a little bit more? I don't know. Like, we need to just ask a lot of questions, not just about the off-leash part, but human behavior with their dog. Because I think it'll be on the rise, and we're not going to stop getting letters. We're not going to avoid incidents that you unfortunately had or Ken. It was horrible. So I think we're going to have to pursue a bit of a hybrid approach because, my dog will always be on leash because it'll get eaten by things. But if I had a big dog, I would be like Jason. I'd want to be able to just walk it in the woods but next to me, not running amok necessarily. So I don't know. But I think our engagement piece has to be, is a critical piece of the solution, but I think in the short term, Eagle to me is a no-brainer. And we should just go ahead.
I'll let you hold your thought. Councilor Wishart.
Well, I was just had comments, not questions. So.
We're on comments.
We're on comments now? Whether you like it or not.
Whether I like it or not. Well, that's fine. We're on comments.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not a dog owner, and I used to be a runner, ran for years, and so I've had plenty of contact with dogs, not always positive. But notwithstanding that, I do from time to time babysit a friend's dog and take it for walks and stuff, and take it off leash on trails away from houses and where it's not going to go on somebody's lawn or something like that. And there is, you know, even for me, not a dog owner, there's a certain joy in just watching the animal take off and run and just kind of just go, and whether it's chasing a ball or something, just to really kind of let it blow itself out and get that kind of exercise that it'll never get if it's sort of within 4 feet of me all the time on a leash. And so there are times when you're walking and the dog can walk and there are more crowded areas, but there are, I think it'd be great to be able to have some areas where the animal can just run unrestrained, sniff where it wants to sniff, and do all the stuff that dogs do. So I think there is a need, particularly in the denser areas, downtown, perhaps Valley Cliff and so forth, for these fenced-in areas, for the areas where it is okay for your dog to run like that. But I don't think that's the only answer. And maybe eventually up in the Brackendale area, I mean, I wouldn't go to 5 acres in the Ray Peters Trail area in the highway right away, maybe 1 acre down at the south end near the houses or something like that. And that's the kind of thing we can expand as the need if we ever want to. One of the real challenges of having these parks is the funding for it. Holy smokes, this is a lot more than $17,500 that we originally thought about. And where does it come from? And how do we pay for it? And we can't just sort of put the price of dog tags through the roof because then nobody will license them. So it's going to come out of general taxation. And it's clearly going to have to be phased in, and I think clearly we would want to start off with the low-hanging fruit first and maybe go into something that's just a little bit more expensive over time. But I think it's just where we are. And I take the point about fencing parks and things like that, but you know, we have parks where we cover it in a soccer field, so there's a lot of things you now can't do in that park area. So it's just part of the mix, I think. I think, as I say, I'd start phasing it in. But the other part that I think we have to do is more enforcement and education. I wouldn't want to just spend the money out there on these parks without also a concerted effort to educate people around some of the etiquette that these animals really require. And also enforcement. You know, I mean, I practice law for a living, and I know there are cases. I've even sued people over the conduct of their dogs and succeeded. And it's been fairly benign stuff, but it was just stupid owners, and they deserve to be nailed. And in extreme cases where the dogs attacked and injured people, there have been criminal charges laid. It's a form of criminal negligence causing injury or something, just the same as if you're driving a car and you blast somebody. So it really, to me, is something that we have to, I think, take a multifaceted approach to. And if there are dogs that are attacking people, or there's instances of that, then we nail that person. And hopefully, it's like the mayor says, I mean, you can have police in every corner. You're not necessarily going to stop crime. Part of the thing that stops crime is the deterrent. If they know there's serious consequences, that's the reason we obey the criminal code. We know there are serious consequences to not doing that. So I think if we kind of bring that along as well, then I could support some of the parks. I think I'd leave it to staff to prioritize them. Obviously, we're not going to do them all in 1 year, not at that scale. The other question I had when I was looking at that is, some of them in more urban settings, like the downtown ones, you know, I can see the need for it, the little doggy bags and stuff. But in the bigger ones or the more remote ones, I wonder about that, whether we just leave it to nature. They're not groomed park areas. We're not talking about somebody going on somebody's lawn. Just let nature take its course and minimize some of the expenses for that. Otherwise, half the people just throw them in the bush, those little bags in the bush anyway, which is, I'm not sure what that's supposed to accomplish. But we can, I think, maybe cut down, my point is we can maybe cut down some of the expenses of the maintenance of some of these areas, not necessarily all of them.
Rick, can you just put the graph back up that shows all the different options? I've got Ted and then Susan and Natasha, and then I'd like to wrap this conversation up by 3:15.
Thanks, Freddie. Yeah, it's really interesting, you know, how complicated these things get sometimes, but, you know, I mean, what about the person that's out walking the trail? You know, it's like, okay, we better put some fenced-in area for the people then. But, well, I know it's not, you know, for a lot of people out in the trail and you got two big dogs lumbering toward you, it certainly takes the fun out of the trail in some cases, especially if you're walking with your grandkids and, you know, and all of a sudden there's these big, really nice, friendly dogs, you know. So I think, I mean, I like the parks you picked and I'm all for them, but in the downtown area, let's mark the trails like everyone's been saying, on leash. And then you can go after that. And any neighborhoods where there's highly used pedestrian trails, mark on leash, and then we can go after those people and tell them. I mean, I know, like, my kid has a big dog and she takes it down to the river, you know, like way out there down to the river. And I know it's not allowed, but to let your dog run, you know, she's way out there. But I really don't like these ones downtown where people that live in the downtown area want to go for a stroll out around the estuary and they get confronted by big friendly dogs all the time. I mean, that's not fair. So we've got a dog park in those areas. Take your dog to the dog park or get way out of town.
Thanks. I also want to add about the maintenance costs. If we start fencing in our green spaces, we're taking away green space that we had designated for, you know, I'm thinking about Eagle Wind and that big green space with the kids park, and having the kids fenced in, or that whole area fenced in. The maintenance is going to be a lot. You're going to have to put in grass every year. It's going to be a lot of staff time, emptying garbage cans. You know, the way it is now is that there's a trail in the back there. People walk their dogs along the trail and come back. It's a circle, so they can walk all the way through Eagle Wind Park. And I just, you know, that was meant to be an amenity for the people that live there and for the people in the downtown to be able to walk around there and use the green space. If we start putting chain link fence around public spaces, I think that education and putting up a sign that says, this one park is an off-leash dog park. You know, if you're in this area, beware that there will be dogs off-leash. And again, I don't think that if you put up that signage that it has to be, if we're gonna enforce or look at that level of enforcement, that, you know, we don't have to make it all the time. Like, we could have our bylaws all the time, but maybe make, you know, a time in the morning and a time in the evening where it's an off-leash dog park, that it doesn't have to take up all the hours of the day. And, you know, and I think we really need to look, if we're gonna make a fenced-in area, we really have to look at realistic maintenance costs. Staff time to maintain a lawn in an off-leash dog park that will get, the lawn will just be mowed down and scratched up and there won't be any lawn left there. So what are the alternatives to that? Maybe it's wood chips or, you know, but just the maintenance of that and the health concerns that I would have of having the dogs in the area with the, you know, piping in water. Now we're looking at a water supply. And if we're going to have water available all the time. So I think that there's a lot of concerns. It's not as easy as it, you know, just like putting chain link fencing and enforcing more. I like our bylaws the way they are now, that everything's on leash and then maybe designating a few parks, but chain link fencing and maintenance and budgeting for all that is a lot of money to the taxpayer. So I just think that it's a crazy amount of money to put in for chain link fencing. And you know it's going to be cut or damaged or vandalized because people in this community didn't move here to have fenced in areas and designated lots for things.
Wow. Natasha? Yeah, thanks, Mayor Heinzman. I just wanted to offer a little bit more of an explanation of the other activities that we're pursuing to minimize problematic conflict, or just further to some of your comments. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that, we can offer that, or just if you're happy to know that there are other things that we're planning, that's.
I think a little bit of detail would be nice.
Yeah, Rick, do you want to?
So what we're looking at, to gain future compliance is we are looking at increasing the fine structure. And we'd probably do that at the same time that we created a new animal control bylaw, because the one we have right now is dated. It's time for a refresher what I'm going to suggest is that we repeal the current one and we actually create a brand new animal control bylaw to cover a number of the things that have been mentioned at the table today. Increased visibility in the community, the trailheads. We're still not going to work our way through the trailhead, but certainly an increased presence at the entrance to the trailheads. And we've already started increasing enforcement in the parks. We've been doing that for the past several months, and we're getting good compliance there now. And we want to continue to maintain a robust licensing campaign. We definitely want to work with the incoming wildlife coordinator to increase that messaging. We very much agree with the philosophy that we think it's important for dog owners to take a leadership role and to do the right thing. I know that's been mentioned, a number of times this afternoon. So we think that's a very important message.
Thank you. So these things take significant public engagement. These are often very contentious issues, as you can tell by the conversation around the table. But I do think it's important to go to the community. I personally would support a couple of these, particularly at the beginning. And maybe we take a very pilot project course of this. Maybe we rent 2 acres of fencing for a summer and try it out. It's an option, but I think one of the things you can do is go to the public with these little Lady Gaga, sorry. I don't know why my alarm went off. And go to the public with these questions about these specific locations and what their expectation is. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Race. I mean, for me, a dog park is like, there are veggie gardens in this park. That space is taken up and it's now a veggie garden. There's a bike park in this area. That space is now taken up and is used by people on their bikes. There's a skateboard park here. It's now designated for skateboarding. So I just see it as one more use by a different group of people in the community. So there is a motion for the committee to consider, and I'll just read it out, that the district pursue public engagement on following off-leash dog locations: Eagle Wind Park downtown, John Under Park Valley Cliff, Raven Drive across near Brant Park, and the Hydro right-of-way and Ray Peters Trail. And I would almost extend the Hydro right-of-way into other park areas in Brackendale. It's hard when there's a cheap fan development proposal in front of us, but there's a cute park potentially going in there. So maybe extend that community engagement to beyond just the Hydro right-of-way. And then, so if someone wants to move that, council committee can consider that. Moved by Councillor Pryor. I'll second that. Councillor Ray seconds. I think we've talked about it, so why don't we just vote on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Blackman, Wolf, and Chappelle opposed. Motion carries. And then I think we'd like staff to come back with, or go out and, I don't know if you even need to come back with it, but strategize a robust public engagement, public information, public awareness, and potentially a sign program. I hate to do sign everywhere sign, but we do need to communicate the responsibility of the dog owners out there. Yep.
And just to add to that, and I think at some point, I think staff's going to have to look at those numbers and make them smaller in the sense that you might have to shrink some areas, prioritize them, and take a look at the maintenance, what's required. Are we grass and fields? There's a whole bunch of things, and partly one of the ways might be just to make some of the initial ones smaller that can be expanded later, because these are big numbers for 1 or 2 years budgeting. So
just on Councilor Reese's point there, the chain link, you can go with just chicken wire, or not chicken wire, but a 6-inch page wire instead of that.
The deer fencing is
Yeah,
by wildlife.
the wildlife fencing was the second option.
Oh, is that
And it's
right?
considerably
Okay.
less money.
Cheaper, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Joanna, Ken, Meg, and we'll take a few minute recess and come back with our next one. We are back in our committee of the whole meeting, and we're on item 3.2 of the Wilson Crescent Neighborhood Micro Plan.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jonas Velnishkis, Director of Community Planning, and with me today is Dave Merrow, Director of Major Projects, and Susan Stratus, who is a contract planner working for the district. And so today we're bringing forward for discussion item around neighborhood planning on Wilson Crescent. And I'll turn it over to Susan for the presentation.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Our purpose today is to bring Council or the committee up to date on some public engagement activities we've undertaken in this neighborhood, and to get some preliminary direction from Council on a number of options that we're looking at for this neighborhood. So the planning area that we're looking at, which is west of Buckley Avenue and west of the secondary and elementary schools, with Wilson Slough forming the north boundary of the neighborhood. It's a relatively small neighborhood and has a number of complex development issues, which is the reason Jonas has asked for this work to be done. A big part of the challenges are the very mixed uses that are there. It's a primarily single-family neighborhood with a lot of apartments also, older ones for the most part. There's a lot of different lot sizes, and future development may need to consolidate some of those parcels to allow for better design. There have been quite a few development applications made. There are 2 active development applications underway, and over the past couple of years there have been 6 pre-applications with applicants looking for district direction early direction on their possible developments. So as you can see from the photographs, there's a lot of challenges with the servicing and road system. It's a very narrow right-of-way, and as you can see in the lower photograph, this is a fairly typical condition. It's a one-way road system, and the roads have no sidewalks or kind of organized parking, so it's a real challenge for pedestrians moving through this neighborhood. Not uncommon in kind of most older neighborhoods, but a little bit worse here because of the narrow right-of-way. On Buckley, the intersections leading from Buckley to Wilson Crescent are really quite difficult. We have had a lot of feedback from the public about how difficult it is sometimes to exit Wilson Crescent. There's a lot of street parking because of the schools across the street on Buckley, and a lack of street lights, although I noticed there is one in my photograph here, so there's at least a couple. And no public and community spaces directly within the neighborhood. Of course, the schools across the street provide public areas, but nothing directly within the neighborhood. So just looking at the OCP policies, this neighborhood is part of the broader Dentville neighborhood. We're looking just at this area. The official community plan does look to have designate the broader area as a neighborhood planning area, but because of the development interest here, we're looking at this first. So the residential neighborhood designation in the new OCP, the area is intended to accommodate residential growth with a diverse mix of housing forms and tenures, with a focus on family-friendly and affordable housing, and also to increase the proportion and size range of multifamily housing. So those are the kind of basic principles of that designation. The current zoning, I guess what's very interesting here is that the neighborhood has been pre-zoned as multifamily going back probably at least 40 years. And despite that multifamily zoning, the majority of properties are actually built out as single-family uses. There are a couple of recent single-family homes here and 3 along here that were rezoned to the RS3 small lot zone. So it's a bit of a challenge with the existing zoning on a number of fronts, which I'll get into in a second. The RM1 zone is a fairly low-density multifamily zone. It has a 0.6 floor area ratio, which is only a notch above single-family. So part of the reason, I guess, we're here is that some of the developers are interested in going for additional density. This is quite a challenging and low floor area ratio to build under, especially if you're doing townhouses. There's not very many properties anywhere in the district that are actually built under this RM1 zoning. There's a couple in this neighborhood which we'll look at, but most of the district is actually built under the RM2 and RM3 where you've got existing multifamily uses. Right now, the majority of units in the neighborhood are actually multifamily, and that's because of the RM3 zone. There are a couple of properties that have quite a large number of units. The single family are, I believe that adds up to 40, something like that. I should have put the table in there. But the actual number of multifamily units are quite a bit higher. Most of those are rental. 5 out of the total 53 parcels in the neighborhood contain rental housing, and that adds up to 160 units total. So half of the homes in the area are rental housing. These are mostly older buildings, and potentially those could come up for redevelopment. If they do, the OCP does have a good replacement rental housing policy about no net loss of existing rental units and replacement at a 1-to-1 ratio, and there's a number of other provisions go along with that. The environmental conditions in the neighborhood, as I mentioned, the Wilson Slough forms the north end of the neighborhood, and you've got the rail line separating you from the Squamish estuary. But even with that separation, the kind of light bluish colored areas are riparian areas that need to be assessed with any future redevelopment. At the north end of the property, there are actually some areas that are within the aquatic assessment area, and they will need a DPA 1 development permit before they can redevelop. Flood hazard also affects this neighborhood. It's all in the floodplain, as much of Squamish is. Some areas on the perimeter and the roadways are designated as secondary floodway, meaning they're intended to flood if there's an overtopping of the dike. And a very small area at the north is in a conditional densification area, so at the very, again with my, here we are.
Susan, do you mind just going back to
Yes.
that before? Just,
yep.
So, can you, on the sort of the north, there's that little green area in the middle there between, on the south side of that?
Yes, which is outside the neighborhood, yep.
No, north end, go down, so keep going south, that funny, right, keep going, no, yeah.
This
That
property?
is it's zoned
R4.
What is R4?
It's an old, it's actually not even listed in your zoning
I couldn't
bylaw.
find
It's,
it.
no, I meant to talk about this with Jonas before the presentation. It's an old rural zone that seems to have hung over from when the new zoning bylaw was put in place. It's a really wet property. It's basically kind of a swamp that is going to need to be dealt with if anybody redevelops. It's got a really high water table there. And the R4 goes back to an earlier zoning bylaw. It looks like it was just never corrected.
That's right. It looks like it was lost basically in one of the zoning bylaw major updates whenever we did probably the last zoning bylaw. R4 just is no longer around. Basically, I think what happened was we removed that zone, replaced it with something else, and this was one of the properties that for some reason kept the map designation on it.
So it's R4, not RL4, it's just R4.
It's just R4.
And it's problematic to develop because it's extremely wet.
Yeah.
It is one of the properties where a pre-application was put in. There is definitely interest in developing that, but it's a very challenged property.
Yeah, so both properties, north and south of that property, have been developed. This property hasn't been developed and has been left on which would be estuary pretty much, like wet riparian lands. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't, like, if it had been developed, they would have drained the land and impacted it.
Yes. And it doesn't mean it's not developable in the future, it's just that conditions have to be met, it has to be raised, and if there's riparian compensation, that has to be.
It's privately owned.
Yes.
Yep.
So as I mentioned, there is the flood hazard of two types, and at the north, the conditional densification area, Jonas's job to get that working for me, applies, and that may limit those red areas, red and yellow areas may have somewhat reduced development potential. There's some extra criteria that apply there. Servicing, there's a number of deficiencies in water, sanitary, and drainage infrastructure. The district has planned some upgrades to water for fire flows for 2018, I believe, and years beyond. Any new development would have to undertake water and sewer modeling for any development, and this is one issue we'll get to a bit later, that for each developer to do this individually is somewhat costly and inefficient, and one of the density bonus things we're recommending is that somebody could undertake this modeling for the whole neighborhood or for at least a broader area to get that done a bit more efficiently. As I mentioned, the area is low-lying, and stormwater management plans are needed prior to new development. The district is planning a stormwater initiative for this area as the first priority of the integrated stormwater management plan, and that's likely within the next few years. So as any older neighborhood, there's a number of servicing challenges. So in the planning report, we have outlined 3 potential options for how we might handle future development here. Now, I should just stop and say the purpose of this neighborhood plan is to come up with some policies for this neighborhood. We're not there yet. We're still kind of looking through what the issues are, but before we devise policies for this, we're going to get some feedback from council and probably some additional feedback from the neighborhood on these options. The 3 options I'm going to walk through, they're all valid, I guess. None of them are unworkable, but we have expressed a preference for one of them. So the first option is to retain the current process, which means that you either work under your existing RM1, RM2, and RM3 zoning, and if you want to do anything beyond that, you go through a site-specific rezoning process. One of the disadvantages of option 1, I should mention before we move on, is that because the area is already pre-zoned for multifamily, there's very limited opportunity to get additional community benefits in terms of park or upgraded street frontage, because all you do is you collect CAC dollars on the difference between, say somebody wants to go from RM1 to RM2, you only collect money on that difference. So you actually get a very small return on your CACs in a pre-zoned neighborhood. Option 2 is in part responding to what we heard from the neighborhood. We got a really big turnout to the public consultation, and a number of people are uncomfortable with expanded housing types in this neighborhood. But under option 2, what we are proposing is expanding the infill options and looking at laneway houses, clustered cottages, duplexes, and triplexes as a way of retaining the single-family home, but giving people more choices than are presently there. And I guess taking a page out of what's going on in the city of Vancouver, we would look at increasing the floor area ratio if we did this. It's quite low currently. And also allowing for strata titling of these new units. The city of Vancouver is going through a huge push to densify their single-family neighborhoods, and that is one of the things that's been recommended there, is to strata title, because just having a laneway house that's still part of the parent parcel doesn't necessarily help people's affordability. So that would be option 2. Option 3, which is the one that kind of is preferred after Jonas and I talking, is actually developing a new custom zone for this neighborhood, a Wilson Crescent CD zone, that incorporates the infill options that we described for Area 2, but structuring the zone to be a density bonus zone, and this would be the allowing apartments, townhouses, plus those infill options throughout the neighborhood, probably with a minimum lot size if it was an apartment. But the density bonus structure would apply, and it would allow people to increase the density if they provided some or all of these things, or there would be a palette of things outlined in the zoning bylaw. Rental housing units, small parks, which would have to probably go at the street edge, streetscape improvements beyond the parcel frontage, trail construction and habitat restoration at Wilson Slough, which is an important density bonus thing to achieve, because otherwise there really is no way to get upgrade of that slough unless we get it provided by the developers, unless the district were to take it on. The slough is in fairly poor condition. People park right along the edge of what should be the riparian area. There's a bit of a mess there. It's not been well taken care of, so it would be an opportunity to get organized street-side parking and to get the riparian area upgraded as a direct community benefit. And dedication of a rear walkway, which I'll show you just shortly on a map. So this may not be the ultimate list of density bonus, but it would be, by having a density bonus structure in your bylaw, you would get your benefits directly in the neighborhood rather than just contributing to CAC dollars. So the possible structure that we're looking at if we did go down the road of option 3 would be right now in what's now the RM1 zone. For townhouses, you may have up to 0.75 floor area ratio, or even up to 1 for the areas that are currently RM2, and even going as high as 1.4, which is a big jump from the current. We would look at increasing most of the lot coverage, but possibly decreasing it for apartments on the premise that they might go a little bit higher, and you'd want to see a more open space on the ground if that were the case. So just looking at some of the density examples that are in the neighborhood now. Right now, both the current and Arbutus Grove were built under the current bylaw, 0.6 FAR in the RM1 zone, 0.59 for Arbutus Grove. The current is below the 10.6 meter height limit, whereas Arbutus Grove basically is built to the extent of the bylaw. These are relatively low numbers by today's standards, and definitely a number of the people who are expressing interest in developing are looking at going somewhat denser. As a comparison, the Breeze development is 0.9 FAR, so that is a fairly significant jump in density. The height is a little bit higher than the 10.68 meters currently. One of the other options that has been brought forward is a 3-story apartment with underground parking. So you've still got 3 stories of height, but your density is really jumping up, and of course that's a result of underground parking. So I think as we look at these examples, these are all reasonable fits within the neighborhood. They're denser than what we've got at the current or Arbutus Grove, but still presenting the same general form that that is already built there.
Susan, just a clarification on this.
Yeah.
When we do FAR, we don't usually count parking as part of the FAR calculation. Do we not?
That's right.
That's right.
So the 1.4 is just for the...
Oh, yes, it is just for the building.
It's just for the,
yes.
The residential unit, so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yes.
You said something about that's mostly parking.
The fact that you're not using your lower floor, even though it's excluded, I guess gives you a whole additional floor for units. So that's how you're getting your increase in FAR, is you've got an extra story.
Yeah, Councillor Reese.
Is it possible to build underground parking in that area, or practical? I mean, I know you can put these tubs in and stuff like that.
It's expensive. You know, it can be done, and the architect that we've talked to about this project is doing another one downtown. And it's achievable, but it's very expensive, you know, to get to those solutions you're describing. And some parts of the site are not as wet as others, so it also depends where you are.
And when we say underground parking, most likely what would happen is be partially underground.
Yes.
So half.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the, and I can wait till the end.
Okay, I'll just walk through the
slide.
you know, there's a lot to absorb here. I'll just walk through the public process. At the start of the project, we posted a web page and did a mail out to residents that the process was going to be done. We also posted an online survey, which we got 85 responses to, which, considering the size of the neighborhood, is a lot. And we had an open house on May 23rd, which again, roughly, probably a bit more than 40, but we did have very good turnout to that. So I did attach the survey results to the report, but the key messages are the respondents that we heard from were kind of split between newer and I would say people who are 4 years or shorter in the neighborhood and longer term residents. So we had a good mix there. We didn't get a good mix between homeowners and renters. The majority of people, 84% that we heard from, were homeowners. And just my reading between the lines, both meeting people at the open house and reading the survey results, I would say the majority of those homeowners probably were the single-family residents who are most concerned about the change. We did hear from people who own strata units and had a chance to talk to a number of them, and they did share a lot of these same issues, but I would say the single-family voice was certainly predominant here. The main issues we heard about were the lack of sidewalks. That's probably the thing we heard most. Chaotic parking, which is the resident term. Traffic and speeding down the narrow roadway, kind of related to the parking and lack of sidewalks. Need for parks and some kind of public space in the area. Unsafe crossing to school. People felt that the sidewalks, although they're marked as you cross Buckley, that they're not particularly well marked. And there was definitely concern about changes to density in the neighborhood. So on just the issue of future development, we had very lukewarm response for apartments and townhouses, kind of 30 to 25%. Some support for additional density in the form of clustered homes and mixed houses. The majority of people responding did support 3-story buildings and kind of limited support in the 25% range for higher forms. Very strong support for a sidewalk on one side of the street. And that was again listed as the most important amenity. And I think what we're talking about in this neighborhood is probably not what I've shown in this picture. It's the only one I could find quickly. We'll probably have a sidewalk on one side of the street and have kind of parking pods organized on the other side of the street. That doesn't exist anywhere today. When the current was developed, they put a painted line down one side rather than a sidewalk, and the traffic staff today, the active transportation staff, really feel that's inadequate, and in future would like to see a proper sidewalk put in. So I'll just go put a map up in front of us, looking at the zoning map for any questions that you might have. So I think what we're looking for is just general feedback and then possibly feedback on those 3 options that we presented.
Thanks. I'm just wondering about this entire area. Why the other streets weren't included, why would we just do, why would we pick one street, Wilson Crescent, and this little tiny piece when we have so much neighborhood planning around Buckley and McGee Street, and that whole section there is basically a neighborhood.
So how did we come up with the parameters of this?
For a microplan.
So this was, one of the reasons was that we have had a lot of inquiries about rezonings in this area. It is a little different from other areas in that it's pre-zoned to multifamily residential. And it's kind of isolated from the rest of Dentville just by the slough running down there. So we've entered into an agreement with one of the property owners in this area to essentially fund looking at a micro neighborhood plan for that area.
Thanks. And I know there are some interested parties in the audience, so if you do want to make a question, make a comment, just put your hand up and join us at the table. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thanks. So the high density down in the far end, the north end.
The RM3 property, yeah.
The big buildings down there, and I see they're in the riparian setback. I mean, I understand they may have been.
It predate, yes.
But they might have sold, and they are really old buildings and really run down kind of thing. And I thought, with the density it has there, I don't mind that density. But so, and I really appreciate staff getting this to us, because I remember this council here, we approved a single-family home there right at the beginning, RS3.
That was previous council.
Was it?
I think this was done by previous council, but I believe this rezoning was a couple of years ago.
And I struggled with that one because at that time I thought, well, this whole area, even staff at the time said that we were kind of looking at a higher density for this area. Fast forward 3 years, here we are, right? So I applaud you for bringing it forward, and I guess with the development pressures, that's good. But I would not want to lose the density at the north end, for sure. In reading the report, I see, basically 50–60% are in favor of higher densifying. But I think basically the report to me tells us what we already knew. So that's a good thing. And but the sidewalks, I mean, we let that Target put a development in there with no sidewalks, and I fought for sidewalks on that one, and we didn't get a sidewalk. So somebody else is going to have to put the sidewalk in front of his property.
Do you have a question, Councillor Pratt?
Well, I kind of didn't.
No, I don't.
I was trying to make one up as I went along there.
Susan, you did mention trails.
I'll finish my
connectivity.
comments later.
Did you have a slide for that?
I didn't. I'll just use the zoning slide. We've been kind of wrestling with this, and it's not the greatest map, but the back of these are long, narrow lots.
That's not a good
yeah.
Go to the image. The overhead.
Let's go to the front.
Our GPS.
There we are.
Yeah, the GPS shows the long narrow lots.
There we are.
Yeah, that's better.
Maybe I can zoom in a bit. Between the two arms of Wilson Crescent, these are long, narrow properties, and the back property line is here. We looked at a couple of things here. My preference was to try and run a rear lane down here to facilitate rear development so we could get the access for new buildings off the streets entirely and run a rear back lane. But that idea has kind of fallen by the wayside based on engineering input. It's too close to the two existing intersections here, and with the amount of traffic generated by the school, it's just not a safe situation. The option is still open to run a rear walkway down here, and that's kind of still on the table. The challenge to doing that is that, the development in this neighborhood is going to be very incremental. There's older homes, there's newer homes, and so we have to kind of factor that in, that do we want to take 3 meters or so off the back of properties as they redevelop, and that's only an opportunity if they redevelop to a higher density. Under current zoning, which many may choose to use, we actually would not really have authority to get that. So even getting a rear pedestrian walkway is a challenge. If we go for a density bonus structure, that would be on the table, and we would have to take a closer look at just how achievable that is. And it may have to meander over time.
We can't, through development permit area guidelines, clarify permeability of lots and sites. So I thought we already had that in our.
I don't know if we could, through development permit process, take a public access on the property. I don't think we can. I don't think we can.
Can we get, okay, I'd like a definitive on that.
Just on this slide.
I've got a couple speakers, Councillor, sorry. Councillor Strong, Councillor Blackwell.
You may have answered that, maybe engineering can answer. Why can't we put a dead-end road like other laneways in there, like a permeable surface dead-end laneway, so that you could have partial densification with laneway homes. Those lots look perfect for having laneway homes in them, and then you could have, you know, not having it exit out Buckley, but having it go out through the other way.
If I may, through the chair, we've tossed this around quite a bit internally, talking with Susan and with our engineering team. There are some challenges with a dead-end lane. That's not ideal from a fire access perspective. It would be nice to daylight it out there. It is also dependent on when those properties come in, when we can advance it along, and when it gets to a certain point, we would need an egress point. It's not necessarily a definitive no at this point. It's something that could potentially still be considered. As Susan mentioned, there are challenges with the access. There's the school drop-off zone right in that area, which is kind of an inevitable issue we have to deal with. There's 2 pedestrian crossings nearby on Buckley on either side of where that new access would be. Some of the sight lines. Right.
I understand the problems with it.
Yeah. And then stormwater challenges. There'd be stormwater infrastructure required there as well.
If I may add to that, the other issue is that it still doesn't deal with the rest of Wilson Crescent. So the lane would service, you know, those properties in the middle, but not the surrounding neighborhood. So we'd still need pedestrian improvements there. So it would be a double take, basically, at the back and at the front.
Councillor Blackwell.
Okay, so with the existing zoning as it is, without a rezoning, somebody could come and build in RM1, which is most of those lots that we're talking about. They could build 33% lot coverage, 0.6 FAR, and they would be required to do street frontage improvements? And if so, what street frontage improvements would those be?
Yes, they would be required to do street frontage improvements. In terms of the level of improvements, Dave, could you speak to?
I can, through the chair. It would essentially be half of the street and a traffic lane and a sidewalk, essentially. It's tricky.
So taking, I guess maybe I'll be more specific, on the northern arm of Wilson Crescent, on those frontages, they would have to put in sidewalks on one side.
It is something that we could ask for.
The challenge is the space in the right-of-way. It's only 10 meters wide.
Yeah, the northern leg has a bit more width, but the southern and western legs are about 10 meters.
And definitely, I take the point that the target development, I think that was obviously a mistake, not getting the sidewalk in there. One of the things that I sort of like to point out to my colleagues around the table is that, you know, we do talk a lot about having complete neighborhoods and missing middle, about those interesting things. I'd actually suggest that this neighborhood, the way it is exactly that. you know, even though the survey results, you know, they captured 14% renters who responded to survey, but if you did a percentage of residents of this area, it's probably the most mixed in terms of tenure, in terms of housing type, and a whole bunch of other things. And I totally appreciate, like, what this report highlights to me is that we as a district have underinvested in the public realm here, and that there are some public realm improvements that are needed, even in its existing form. And I visited the site today, the neighborhood, and I don't know specifically which apartments Councillor Pryor was talking about, but the one in the RM3 zone, the Edgewater apartments, they didn't actually appear to be very run down to me at all. It actually looked like they had done, they have done some recent renovations.
Built in 1965.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look pretty good. I went there.
And you know, people live in houses that are built in 1905. It's a matter of maintenance for sure.
Construction, single glazed windows.
Yeah. And there's lots of parking lot there and whatnot. Anyway, my point is that I'm concerned that we're trying to make up for a deficiency that we've created by loading more density into this area. And my other concern is that the location being bordered on 3 sides by basically borders that are very difficult to cross, with only one entrance and 1 exit. To me, I get all the principles around, you know, planning close to the core and all of that, and walkable communities, but more density in this area, it makes me uncomfortable. And, you know, understand developers want to squeeze more units, that's their prerogative, but I think the existing zoning allows for intensification already. And, you know, it's kind of a turnkey thing, which is a certain advantage. You don't have to go through a really long rezoning process. You can just get a DP, but clearly there's a financial incentive, and, you know, I respect that, but I just don't, I'm not really in favor of this kind of direction for this particular area. And I'd like to see us as a council, you know, in the future actually budget municipal funds to improve the infrastructure there, regardless of whether development takes place. And I think there was one other question that I had, and it was around.
What was the question?
Yes. Yes. The question was, in terms of the railway, are there any other potential pedestrian crossings or anywhere?
Over the CN track?
Yeah.
New crossings?
Yeah.
I don't believe so. I think it would be very
dead body.
difficult to
It's a bit of a rhetorical question.
to achieve that.
Okay.
I just wanted to go back to my question earlier about the trails. I think it would be challenging to put one sort of lengthwise at Wilson, but it's a big block. So
Yes.
if you live on, you know, 1140, and you're trying to get to 1105 or 1085, you're walking a long distance. So it was more
Yes,
I guess the
breaking the
north
block up,
south
yeah.
or the northeast southeast connectivity that I was interested in.
Through the mayor, we did look at that, and that's another option for increasing permeability. The challenge again is just the existing development and getting the right configuration of parcels. I think the only way that's going to happen is if you get some consolidation of lots looking for a bigger development. Otherwise, these are quite narrow, and they're only, if you look at Arbutus Grove kind of being a typical width, there's only enough width to put townhouses and a driveway. And so if you're going to get redevelopment under the existing zoning, you're just not going to get that. You could potentially get it if that's the direction, if you got the right combination of consolidations.
Thanks. I've got a whole slew of speakers, but I do want to remind everyone that we have a meeting that starts now, so just try to keep your comments pretty succinct. I have Ted, Karen, Susan, and Doug.
Thank you. Well, the north-south walkway that you just brought up was, I was going to also make that point. a through walkway would be really nice in this area, maybe even 2. And so with the sidewalks going around, I wouldn't even try to go with the back alley idea. I would suspect the sidewalk going down the south side of Wilson Crescent all the way down there is the best shot at what we can get. And people on the north side, already on the north side at the south end, the RS3 area has got a curb, it's got no sidewalk and I think no parking on that side. So like we really constrained ourselves there, so we can really only, anyway, so the loop sidewalk runs around, cut through the middle, and the option 3, is definitely the one I'm partial. I mean, those big lots in there and, close to the schools, I have no qualms about a one road in, one road out. It's not like, to Jason's point, of all that density in and only in one road. If you're all going in one direction, all coming out of one direction, that really simplifies that and makes the flow. Even now, that's quite a nice street because you're not going up that way, so you can make your loop around. So I'm totally in favor of option 3 there.
Karen, then Susan, then Jonathan, Jason.
Your comments have thrown me for a loop now. I'm a little bit angry at you, but that's okay. That's helpful. What's the timeline? If we did option 2, how quickly could we implement that? If we did option 3, how quickly could we implement that?
I think both option 2 and 3 would take probably a similar amount of time. Which is certainly, I think, within the realm of this council's timeline. So prior to the election, we have already done the public engagement, so we would just have to go back and kind of report on update the community of what's happening, and then draft the bylaws.
Okay.
So
my other question is, given this is in flood hazard zone, so the Breeze was given additional height because of their rooftop, whatever they call them, sky lounges.
Yeah.
What sort of fill would have to go in this neighborhood? Is it similar to those small lot homes that are right on the corner of Buckley and Wilson? Like, is that when we're looking at? I'm just trying to, because what happened with the Breeze, right, is now you've got old homes and then they, what seems like a sort of above standard height, but they really tower above their neighbors now that they've been built because of the fill that went in. So when you're talking about 10.68 meters, is it all going to be that same level there, or is there going to be differences?
What do they measure 10.68?
I think the recent townhouse development, the Arbutus, would probably be the best example of the kind of topography on new developments. The Breeze was a little different because I think the area where the Breeze is, the flood construction level is actually higher. Plus they were doing underground parking at the front with the commercial going in. Mm-hmm. So I think the topography will be different than the Breeze. We certainly wouldn't want to see that happen while you have existing houses around in the middle of the community.
Okay, and my other question then is, if we do, can you get sort of these positive parking and a sidewalk all the way around Wilson Crescent? Like, do we have a wide enough right of way to actually accomplish that?
Through the chair, they're on the south side of Wilson Crescent. It sort of exists already in informal nature. There's the hydro poles and the light standards, and hydrants interspersed in those natural parking areas there. As you move around to the east leg, there seems to be parking on both sides. So I think it definitely could be retained if we want to continue the sidewalk around on one side. It would eliminate a bit of the parking that's currently there, which is an issue for the community. And then similarly on the north side, that would be similar to existing conditions with those sort of parking polygons.
I would say yes, there is room, it's challenging, but And I guess that if we were going to have redevelopments, that gives us if there's any rezonings, gives an opportunity to negotiate anything that is needed there in terms of additional width if there are some situations.
My last question is, I noticed in the comments that came back in the survey is also about height and not getting too high. And is there a way, if we went with option 3, to scale the height from highest at the back, respecting that the lower density in the current zoning gets lower as you move towards Buckley Avenue? And could we bring it down that way through this kind of density bonusing scheme?
The height is really a challenging issue because you've got these kind of in-between situations where you've got existing single family, and yes, anything new that goes in is going to be an uncomfortable fit. And you have to ask, you know, is that single family home going to be there for 5 years, 10 years, 40 years? You know, it's really a lot by lot determination. I can't give a quick answer to that, but you can establish guidelines here to try and deal with that fit. And you've already got OCP guidelines about terracing things adjacent to lower height uses. So it's also a matter of using your DP guidelines wisely when you're next to single family. But I think each and every development, whether we allow additional density or not, is going to be a bit of a challenge when there's existing single family.
We can certainly add, and I think, I'm not sure if we touched on that in this report, but if there was consideration for a higher use such as apartments, then we would add setbacks for upper stories.
And I have Susan, Doug, Jason.
Thanks. I would agree with my fellow councillor on the missing middle part. Wilson Crescent is always, you know, it's always been fascinating to me. I love driving through there because of the mixed density and the missing middle. And I think adding more density would be really complicated here. The gentle density, like allowing laneway homes and smaller cottages and mixing it up a little bit more, I wouldn't mind. But option 3, it's amazing when you can always tell when staff has a preference. It's always well laid out. There's different colors. It's amazing, but
works.
Yeah, not so much.
Well,
so
usually staff are very direct with what their recommendations.
Yes, it gets a whole page.
Otherwise, they're giving us their.
So option 2 to expand infill options, I would be in support of, but I don't think that basically. What I'm seeing in all our neighborhoods is every single home being bought up en masse and en bloc. And I think that absolutely removes missing middle and gentle density and neighborhood options. We have not invested in sidewalks at all, and we've been waiting for rezonings. And to just have rezonings for the sake of a sidewalk and a lamp is, I find inappropriate. I think that actually, I like option 1 or option 2 where it's laneway houses or clustered cottages, duplexes or triplexes. You know, densifying 2 lots together and making a triplex or a quadplex where there's 4 apartments in one area, and having the option to actually have walkways in between, and asking for those walkways or those pedestrian access areas. I just don't want to see this become blocks of apartments where we have no access and lineups to get onto Buckley. So putting a whole whack of new density where you are constrained by in and out. And this is a lot of lots in between this square with a lot of density at the end. And that's why I would have liked to see a more comprehensive sidewalk planning, road access planning with the other neighborhoods.
The report does speak a little bit to the infrastructure deficiencies in this neighborhood. So that's part of the conversation, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Jason already brought that up. So, Councillor Spill, if I may ask, it sounds like what you're describing is option 2.
That's right.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Absolutely, that is.
Yeah, with the additional different housing
Yeah, and
pipes
I'm
within the RM1 zone.
That's right, and I'd have to pull out the strata title for the units and examine that a little bit more. I would want to understand why strata units as opposed to ownership.
Well, through the mayor, that is a big conversation all on its own, and we would have to bring you more information on that, and there's pros and cons.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks.
And just a reminder, let's try not to repeat what everyone said.
So when I first looked at this and when I was reading the report, to take a different view of it, the first thing that struck me is the noise from the railroad, which we get ongoing complaints from. We have since I've been on council. So whatever we do here, there's nothing we can do with existing buildings, of course. People have chosen to live there, but with new construction, with new people moving into new construction, if there's going to be any, then I think we would want to apply some form of covenant similar to what we did in the oceanfront. And I don't want to get more specific than that. And also, building standards, maybe it's triple pane windows on that side, etc. Things like that for noise attenuation, because the railroad's not going away. I think that's the one thing we can be very certain of here. The other thing is, it would be nice to take advantage of some of these little sloughs that are here and there and sort of make a bit of a recreation area out of it. I'm not talking about intensive development of it, but just a path through it and possibly clean it up a little bit, make it more accessible. And I don't know if you'd ever be able to put a bridge across it, because I think the other side is almost entirely developed. But if you're talking about north-south connectivity, that might be one way, at least for walking and cycling, that you could connect that development across the slough to Buckley Avenue to the north, if you could ever find a place for a bridge to land on. The other thing, listening to the conversation, and I thought, well, it's a great place for density because it's close to services, it's close to downtown, it's got buses, and sort of ticks off all the boxes. And then you look at the road and you think, holy smokes, how would that ever work? And other than going in there and expropriating a significant road allowance, it really doesn't work. And maybe it is a missing middle place. Maybe it's just a quirky little neighborhood. And as I was listening to people talk, I thought, gee, I wonder if we just say no cars and let everybody walk through there. And
wow.
And that probably didn't help my election campaign. but still, if cars are a problem, quite seriously, and they are very constrained streets, and we do want it to be pedestrian friendly at least, then I would get really quite intensive about vehicle management to the point of saying no on-street parking, things like that, or very, very limited on-street parking. As much as I hate them, I would even consider putting speed bumps through there to control the speed. And things like that to make it more of a walking neighborhood, even though people are going to eventually get in a car at some point and drive away. The other thing is, if we are going to allow redevelopment, and I'm kind of leaning towards some development, but not just sort of right across the whole place, to expand the side yard setbacks and open it up a little bit. So you don't have somebody with a single family home, all of a sudden you've got a significant building right beside them. And so open it up a little bit. And I mean, it goes without saying, if there's ever a rezoning opportunity, we would want to grab some public space out of it. I think that's almost a given. And that I know goes against development philosophy where they want to build lot line to lot line practically, but I think that would be one of the approaches we would have to take on any rezonings through there, is to get some more public space. And then beyond that, I'm sort of bouncing around between 1, 2, and 3, which is not a lot of help for you, but I think that's kind of, I think there's sort of pros and cons to each one of those.
Jason?
Yeah, and I wanted to mention and sort of see what staff's reaction was around. We had gotten some correspondence just very recently from the Squamish Historical Society about, they have a heritage register of some buildings, a list, and then in particular the 1020 Wilson Crescent, which is purportedly potentially the oldest building in Squamish and also of fairly significant historical significance because of the fact that it was a school built at the request of the Squamish Nation.
Teachers? The teachers?
No, a separate one. 1020, it's called, I think they gave it a name.
It's right next to the current.
The Barnfield home?
I think it's that purple, almost, in between RS3 and RM2.
Anyway,
There's a little house just next to the current on the south side.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting to know that, yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of thinking about how, you know, if there are other values incorporated into this plan, how do we get that incorporated and, you know, recognizing limitations for local government, but kind of, I think identifying that is important.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate you bringing up history, Jason. That's something we seem to miss out. So parking, I like the idea of no street parking, but that means there has to be little parking lots in the neighborhood for all the guests. And so, and not necessarily on the north or the west, but Wilson Crescent to the south. That one strip seems to be the tightest. So parking was, you know, like when you look at all the other developments, not all of them, but a lot of them that we've improved in the last few years, we've got the one per unit and it's not cutting it really. I mean, it might in a few years when people start taking the bus and driving their driverless cars. So parking is a big thing. Setback, like Doug said, I mean, that's what when I start kind of visioning the area, I love the idea of a through block walkway so you can cut through. Well, there might be a couple of them because the setbacks in areas are large enough to allow flow through there so you can cut through. And so when any development came in or proposal, you'd have to make sure that we got access on their setbacks. You know, so we did forget that. On the zoning, on the number 2, it says retain single-family homes. Option 2, retain single-family homes. Those single-family homes, some of them, the lots are about 1,400 square feet, 14,000 square feet. And, you know, Sue said, well, you get a couple and put a six-pack on them. Well, a couple of them would take a small part. And so that's what's happening. You know, people are looking at amalgamating 2 lots, some are amalgamating 3 lots, and the more, that's the pressure that's on us right now. So you go with the flow, or, you know, so that's why it pushes me over to 3 from 2, because I don't think, you know, there might be some little areas where people might want to keep their single-family home, but lots that size. I mean, Sue was just saying that a single lot downtown, 1.4, 1.5 downtown Squamish, a single empty lot, 1.5, you know.
50 by 100.
So a lot of financial pressure on there. And then to Doug's point on the bridge, what an excellent idea, you know. I mean, that to me is, that should have been my idea. Way to go. Because we're going on to, we'll do Dentville next. I mean, that will be a neighborhood plan next. And if we line things up through some incentives, we'll get that little bridge going across there. And, you know, it just might be really, really, really nice. Parking through all the ways, so setbacks. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
I'm going to suspend this meeting for a minute, just open up the special meeting and look for motion to adopt the special meeting agenda. Moved by Council Payne, seconded by Council Cryer. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And motion to close that meeting. By Council Payne, seconded by Council Cryer. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We've suspended the special meeting. We are now back in the committee of the whole meeting. Karen and myself are going to try to wrap up the direction on this.
So, I'm floating back and forth between 2 and 3, and for the reasons that Jason brought up around how much can we tax the infrastructure that's there, because it's not adequate really for what's already there. So I'm sitting with that concern that we could overburden this neighborhood and take away its livability. I think it's already sort of stretched in terms of its livability right now because we didn't account for parking with that current development and frontage improvements there. I do want to encourage some redevelopment in there because I think there is a better use than just single-family homes. And I think that's been acknowledged for a long period of time, given its current zoning. So I would say right now I'm sort of sitting more with option 2, but I'm trying to figure out how we do get some of these. Can we, like you talk about protecting the rental housing units, I know that legislation is coming down from the BC government, but that is still viable under option 2.
Oh, absolutely. And I think in the
Under
report,
any option.
Under any option.
That's right.
And so I'm wondering if there's areas towards the north and the back where we can apply a more option 3 approach, where height and density bonusing wouldn't impact the viewscape and the sense of the neighborhood, and then go more towards an option 2 as we move towards Buckley Avenue. So encourage the density in where it already exists, and then a kinder, gentler approach as we move south and east. I don't know if that's even possible. Mostly I'm just trying not to decide.
Through the mayor, it's a very tough, we've wrestled with this. It's a very complex, and as Councillor Blakenbulf has pointed out, it's a charming little neighborhood. It's got kind of a really interesting mix, which is kind of an ideal in many ways. But the reality of house prices also in Squamish is really another factor in how we're looking at this too. There's really a demand for higher density.
Yeah, can I ask just a quick question? Sorry. Given the changes we're bringing in with the zoning bylaw around RS3, would that encourage more of, so smaller homes, so not taking up lot line to lot line, would you see that potentially impacting this neighborhood?
In terms of conversion of some of this low density single family to RS3?
An RS3.
It's hard to say whether combining because I think even for RS3 you'd have to, it'd be difficult to subdivide those lots, the skinny long lots, for access purposes. So I think that would be a challenge unless you were consolidating properties.
Yeah, it's a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario. It is, as Councilor Blakenbulf and others have said, it's got everything. It's got small garden apartments, it's got slightly larger apartments, it's got townhomes, it's got single family homes, it's got RS3, it's got new, it's got old. It's probably one of our most diverse and interesting neighborhoods from that perspective, and I think something we're trying to get back to. So we don't necessarily want to lose the lower density elements to that neighborhood. And just make it all RM1 or RM2. So I think adding definitions absolutely is important. So that's certainly part of option 2 and option 3. The damned if you don't issue is if you start to have consolidation, because these lots are long and skinny, it does minimize what you can do. But then you have consolidation and you start to get all the same housing form again, which is something we're trying to create an interesting, eclectic mix in there. So I don't know if there's, and I'm just spitballing here, but I don't know if there's, if lots or if we can create some sort of parameters in a neighborhood whereby if consolidation creates larger lots, they have to provide more than one type of housing form, or like I'm just trying to think a little creatively about how we make sure we're not just consolidating big swaths and having just a townhome neighborhood, because that's what will happen unless
Minimum
some
lots,
boundaries.
maximum lots.
Yeah, I think we could certainly do that, and that was one of the principles we were looking at, is making sure that with RM1, what we've got there now, you could turn it all into just townhouses, and kind of, you know, 1 or 2 lots put together with a driveway and a bunch of townhouses. And I don't think that is ideal either. So we could look at certain lot sizes and ensuring that once you get there, you're starting to mix the density.
Yeah.
And we could, maybe what we could do is take a look at what a blended option between 2 and 3 looks like, if that's what council's preference is.
I think that's, people are walking back between 2 and 3, so I think that's exactly sort of where I think we're going. I'm not, I've got your head, I actually sort of think that this is, that we can achieve that sort of perfect missing middle without having to do extreme height here. I think we create the density through generally the same built form, but having different densities within those built forms. So I kind of think this is a good area to do that, and I'm not, I'm happy not to have higher apartment buildings in this area. Yeah, come on up. We've got to finish this conversation in about 5 minutes, but come on up. Not yet. Hold on. Well, come up, but don't speak it. But join us, please. So I'd like, you know, that's where the density bonus piece is. I think we're going to start to get 6, 7, 8-story buildings being in there, and I don't think that's necessarily what we want to see.
No.
So I do have Councillor Elliott, and then.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
That's my priority.
Sorry, it was Ted. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, just quickly, figure out the trail system, where you want to put the trails through block walkways and stuff, and then go from there. Best to lock those things in, and then things kind of shape around it.
And I guess maybe an option on that is the properties that have those connectivity points, maybe just those properties get density bonus. For example.
So
Introduce yourself.
I'm Nick Field.
Hi, Nick.
Hi. I just actually kind of moved full-time into Squamish recently. I've kind of been back and forth for the last little while, but I've got a lot on the Wilson Crescent. It's actually on Buckley. It needs to be torn down for sure. It was built in like 47. It's not a realistic place to live for my family. Like, something has to happen to it. I want to express why I think it makes sense to go denser. It's because every other place in Squamish where I have an option to live, I would need 2 cars, but there I don't. I only need 1 car. I can walk to get groceries. My children are going to be able to go to school or a French school I can pick, then high school, and I can walk to work downtown. I'm going to walk home from this meeting right now. So for that reason alone, I can see that density makes sense. You want more of that in the community. You want people to not absolutely need a car, and they don't need it there. That's the point I really want to hammer home, is that from there, everything is walking distance. And I would think you'd want to put as many people as possible in that area.
So you have a single family home, but you're zoned RM1, correct?
I am zoned RM1.
Yeah, so you have the zoning for more density on that.
Yeah.
So you're advocating for even more density?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
RM3?
Yeah, I would put, if my law were big enough, I'm not sure it is, but I'd put an apartment building there. It's right across from the high school, it's right across from the schools. That makes sense. You see that in other communities or other cities for a reason.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So staff, based on the conversation, I think we're sort of in that option 2, option 3 area. Do you think you have enough feedback or thought that help you come back with a bit of a strategy on this, or?
Yeah, through the mayor, it's, I think we're kind of looking at a blend. I mean, we put these 3 options out there to get some ideas on paper, but I think there's things to select from option 2 and 3, and I think the commitment to scale and the diversity of housing types here is an important message. That's also what we heard from the neighborhood. So we have to figure out how to achieve this while also allowing a change in housing forms. And it may be that the Buckley road edge and the far end of the neighborhood are different characters than the center where most of the single family is. So I think we've got quite a bit to work with based on the comments.
There were quite a few comments though about, and I just want to make sure that they were absorbed, that the Buckley do not have the higher heights. So, I mean, there's all sorts of comments. In comments you get, people think there should be high heights, people think there should be nothing. So I just wanted to, I wanted to make sure that all the comments that are being absorbed within the public engagement aren't necessarily saying density here, density there.
No, and just in response to that, I think, one of the things we're wrestling with is trying to get a change in housing form, and apartments may be an appropriate housing form. There's a number of advantages to that, but they don't need to be 6 stories high.
And they don't need to be a whole block long.
They don't need to be a block long, and I think Eunice and I'll work on some ideas about kind of how, there is a huge advantage to getting away from just having townhomes, but having multifamily living on single stories that you get in an apartment. So we'll look at this. I mean, there's, all of it is creating a fit, and I think kind of retaining some of that character by not having, it may be as simple as kind of having a maximum parcel size. Maybe you don't want anything more than 2 or 3 parcels consolidated, and if you get above 2, it has to be broken up, the buildings. There's a number of things we can look at here.
Okay, so you have enough to go on?
We've got a lot of interesting information.
Awesome, thank you very much. I will entertain a motion to terminate the meeting. Moved by Doug, second by Ted. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. We have about 7-10 minutes breakdown.
Can everybody take their own stuff to their desks?